I was raised Catholic, but during my college years, I very carefully and deliberately left Catholicism. I remain a theist, believing in a general God of my own understanding, but I am convinced that Catholicism is demonstrably false. Back in the mid-90s, interviewing people for a book I wrote called Confronting Believers, I had the chance to talk to Father Ron Taselli, a professor of philosophy at Boston College. We had 3 sessions. I argued against Catholicism and Christianity. Father Ron defended traditional Catholicism. First topic, Galileo.
And unfortunately, I think what happened was the Holy Office, in disciplining Galileo, sort of came down on the wrong side. It's not that there was a teaching that heliocentrism, that heliocentrism is false. There wasn't a teaching to that effect, but in disciplining Galileo the way they did, I really think that it gave people a cudgel with which to beat the church. And I think it was unfortunate. But again, the teaching authority wasn't really compromised because there was no teaching. I mean, the church never taught that the earth, that the sun went around the earth. I mean, the church never taught that.
I have a quote that says, this is the Inquisition here saying, quote, "The first proposition that the sun is the center and does not revolve about the earth is foolish, absurd, false in theology, and heretical, because expressly contrary to Holy Scripture."
Now, number one, that statement, I don't know. I mean, I'm sure it was not. See, what I would have to do is I have to see who said. In other words, when you say the Inquisition said this, were these theologians within the Inquisition? Was this? I know it was not officially promulgated. I mean, I know that was not officially promulgated.
Editorial comment. I just read him a quote showing that it was officially promulgated. This is a quote from the Inquisition, an official quote from the theologians of the Holy Office. What am I supposed to think, that it's not official? That the church grabbed random bystanders that day to record their opinions for the official records, while the real clergy and the real pope were actually on summer vacation somewhere? I don't think so. Sure, the church was not normally in the business of promulgating scientific theories, but that was their stand on this issue, that the sun revolved around the earth, and that to propose otherwise is to contradict Scripture.
So why did they arrest him? Just for being disobedient?
Oh yeah, well, they arrested him for being disobedient. See, the Inquisition, and people in the Inquisition thought that this was in fact heretical and wrong. He shouldn't be doing this. The Pope was furious with him. And so, how should I say, the Pope, who was kind of his shield, removed his protection. And so Galileo was sort of at the mercy of these theologians in the Inquisition. Now, but again, what the Church never taught any of these things. But some people in the Inquisition, I'm sure, really did believe that. Galileo was told he was able to propose this as a kind of hypothesis and to entertain it hypothetically. What he was not able to do was to claim that he had demonstrated it, which of course he hadn't. Even he knew he hadn't demonstrated it. So
he knew he hadn't.
He had not.
He wasn't sure.
No, right. According to the canons of demonstration that he himself recognized, he knew that he had not really demonstrated his own theory to be true, but he thought that it was the best explanation for the data. Now Galileo proposed his theory in this book, the Dialogue, as demonstrated, as truly demonstrated. And so, in other words, they got him on that. See, they could get him on that.
So you're saying he didn't have the data to support himself?
He had data to support himself, but he didn't have a strict demonstration. And he didn't. I mean, everybody agrees with that. He didn't really have a strict demonstration. Even he knew that. But he acted, he wrote as though he did, when he didn't. So in other words, they had that. He's not totally innocent here, but on the other hand, the Inquisition, in pouncing the way they did, really, they too got caught up in the middle of something they should never really have got caught up in the middle of. And so it was a very unfortunate incident, badly understood in the history of the Church, that has, it's left us very vulnerable. So people ask questions like this. Well, the Church condemned Galileo and taught that what he said was wrong, and obviously he was right. When that isn't really what happened.
Editorial comment: in my opinion, that is exactly what happened. The Church taught that Galileo was wrong, but he was right. And Father Ron's attempt at whitewashing, to me, is very flimsy. Galileo's character or lack thereof, his innocence or lack thereof, his proof or lack thereof, is relevant only in how the whole scenario played out. It is not relevant to the Church's taking its erroneous position opposing heliocentrism. If Galileo were a serial murderer, that still doesn't get the Church off the hook. The Church was wrong and opposed scientific truth. Next topic, lightning rods.
And then there's a good book by Arthur Koestler called The Sleepwalkers. Koestler is certainly not a religious man. And he has a scathing chapter on Galileo. It's worth reading.
Who's it scathing against?
Against Galileo.
Against Galileo?
Yeah. Yeah. So I would... it's not really so black and white as people make it out to be. There's another book by some guy named White, who used to be the president of Cornell. It's called The Warfare of Science and Religion.
I read that book, yeah.
Oh wait, The Warfare of Science and Religion. Is that a history of the warfare between science and religion? That's very anti-church. I mean, he puts the worst interpretation on everything.
I thought it was pretty reasonable.
On everything possible. But again, that's a good book. I mean, that's a good book. I think.
Yeah, one of the things I remember from that is that lightning rods, the Church wouldn't allow lightning rods to be used, and dozens of bell ringers were killed in the meantime.
I don't know. I have no idea. I mean, I never even heard of that. Yeah. But I mean, all these things have some good reason. I mean, all these things have some good reason, whatever it is, even though it might seem odd to us. Usually, if this was a kind of general edict, and believe me, I've never heard of it, but maybe, I'm not denying that, maybe it was, but you can rest assured if it was, there was some very good reason for it. Some very good human reason.
Well, as White says, the Church didn't want people... The lightning storms were the result of demons, and the Church wanted people to be praying and not doing scientific experiments to get something like that.
I don't believe that. I mean, that sounds ridiculous. I really don't believe that. Again, it's possible, but it just sounds hokey. It sounds like a made-up reason. I don't believe it.
So you're saying there was some reason why the Church didn't want lightning rods?
Well, there was
I can't imagine.
I can't imagine. I mean, they had to. You'll find out that there was some reason, and probably you'll find out that there wasn't some sort of general condemnation. I don't know. I'll take a look at it. I'll look into it.
It's pretty strange though, because these churches because the church is so high with the steeple, they tended to get hit by lightning and destroyed again and again and again. And so why they would not use a very very simple thing that Ben Franklin invented to prevent that for 30 years after the invention? I don't know. I thought White made a good case there.
Well, it may be. I've never heard of it, and it doesn't sound. It just doesn't sound right. I mean, I know the sorts of stupid things churchmen do, and that doesn't sound like one of them. It really doesn't. I mean, it just sounds phony. But I mean, if it's true, it's true. I just would agree with it. But I mean, that one doesn't ring true. But again, since I don't know anything, I just have to say, I would bet money it's not true.
Editorial comment: I think the Church's prohibition of lightning rods is exactly the kind of stupid things that churchmen do, reacting against anything that might erode the authority and power of the Church. Skeptic magazines and Holocaust Revisionism.
The magazine The Skeptic.
I get that too.
You get Skeptic magazine?
Yeah.
Michael Shermer's magazine?
Yeah.
Yeah. Why doesn't the Skeptical Inquirer examine the Holocaust?
For what reason?
Whether it happened. Why doesn't the Skeptical... Why are they interested in Uri Geller bending pins and some visionary in Wisconsin? Why don't they investigate whether the Holocaust really happened?
Because they know it did.
I don't know. Did it?
Well, there's plenty in Israel footage and
well, there are plenty
video.
of people who say it never did and couldn't. Now it seems to me
but if you see video of the emaciated bodies.
Well, but what did they die from? What I'm asking is why do these people investigate these things that really don't cost them anything? In other words, it's not costly to write a critical article on the Shroud of Turin, whether it's real or not. It's not costly to write an article about Uri Geller, but it would be very costly for them to write an article coming to a skeptical conclusion, if they did, about the Holocaust. I mean, I just put that into your brain. Seems to me that's something, because there are people, and there's an organization called the Institute for Historical Review that denies the Holocaust. They say it did not happen, that there were no gas chambers, that the whole thing is a hoax, a complete hoax, a political hoax perpetrated on this country by the United States, naturally, by Russia, and of course now by Jewish organizations. Now, I don't know. I can't even conceive of that. I was brought up believing all of this, and
but I don't accept it just by being told it. But what I accept it is when I see a lot of video and when I see people being interviewed. And you can tell by the way they're talking that this it happened.
Well, now wait a minute.
You see enough of it.
We have many eyewitness accounts of gassings at Dachau. Well, we now know that no one was ever gassed at Dachau. Now, to me, this gives me pause. I mean, we have detailed recollections of children being gassed at Dachau. Well, now all of a sudden, no one was ever gassed at Dachau.
They found that out? There's no...
Yeah, there's no, absolutely. In fact, I was at Dachau twice, and it says, this room, planned as a gas chamber, never used. Never completed. Construction never completed. So, well, I say to myself, well, then how can I, if these testimonies are false, how do I know that these others are true? Now, naturally, do I have any reason for really doubting? Of course not. I accept sort of this stuff, but my interest is, I know many very smart people who are so-called deniers of the Holocaust. They're very smart.
Really?
Very. And they're very cynical. They're very cynical, skeptical people, and they're very smart. And they say it never happened. Because for me, I have always believed that, my example of prime evil has been the Nazis. And what they did to the Jews. And I still believe that. So I'd rather, just until the thing is forced on me, I'd rather sort of go on thinking that. And I still believe it, even if there were no gas chambers, I believe it. Because it seems to me Jewish culture was destroyed in Europe, and that's a monstrous thing. And even if people didn't die of gassing, if you put people into situations, separate families, put them into situations where they're going to work and not be fed properly, get diseases and die, well, it seems to me you're just as guilty as if you gas them. So I'm not particularly concerned about gas chambers. But the question I ask is, why doesn't Skeptical Inquirer and these other, why don't they investigate this? Seems to me this is a prime opportunity. Could it be that they're afraid to? Is it possible that they want to take the easy targets rather than and they don't want to come to they fear that they might possibly come to the wrong conclusion. Because if this is false, this would be the expose of the century. This is the hoax of the century. It's been nothing like it. You would be exposing this. Forget Uri Geller, that small change. The incredible Randy has never exposed anything like this. This would, why don't you do it? I say maybe it really, probably, maybe it really happened and they just have all this evidence. But my real belief is that the reason they don't do it is they're deadly afraid to touch it. They'd rather take on Uri Geller and somebody who claims to, and Whitley Strieber, who claims to have been kidnapped by aliens.
Mm-hmm.
Here's my second meeting with Father Ron: the Bible and evolving morality.
Let me read this. The claim of the writers of the Bible to a supernatural inspiration will merely excite the reader's ridicule when he finds the power and wisdom of the God of the Bible illustrated by vacillation and blundering, and his mercy and goodness by inefficacious cruelty and antiquated injustice. When he finds that this heavenly influence has not preserved the writings from glaring marks of ignorance and barbarity, from oriental extravagance, hyperbole, and bad taste, and from the fouler stain of oriental obscenity. So that's the...
Who is that from?
Evans Bell, the God of the Bible.
Yeah. Well, I agree with that. I didn't. So how do you object to that? There are things in the Bible where God is spreading dung on people's faces, where He demands the whole nations are slaughtered. Now, and He gets upset when everybody's not slaughtered, including the little kids, the babies, and the animals. So I would agree with what he just said.
You really, in order to understand the Bible, really, I think, what you have to do is understand the situation of Jews at the time, situation of other people at the time. They were very barbarous. I mean, people were were not at all ladylike, and they didn't have very high manners.
But doesn't that indicate to you that the words of the Bible come from those people and not from God?
And so you have a gradual development in history by this great people of a certain view of themselves and of God, and a certain view of a certain exalted view in a way of morality that then they realized could not apply only to them, but had to apply outside themselves. And then with Christianity you have the fullness of revelation.
But I don't see how that relates to the God-directed cruelty. When God is telling them to slaughter, this issue right here, I guess, it discusses about the slaughter of the Amalekites. How is that a step on the way to better morality? It's not. It's just plain barbarism.
Well, yeah, but notice. I don't know particularly, and we don't know except really through the Bible about those people. But you do know this, that as a matter of fact, people, the notion of slaughter and war, it was just part and parcel of the way people were.
I don't argue with that.
Yeah, no, exactly.
But why is it coming from God?
Well, exactly. And what God is doing, what's happening is God is directing them in ways they can understand, right? And so this happens, and then as the Jews begin to reflect on their own experience, they begin to realize something about the way they ought to behave, the way they're called to behave, and it's in the light of what develops out of this that you can look back on that and realize that this thing at best, this slaughter at best, was simply God's way of taking us where we were at the time and attempting to lead us from that into something better. But it's like...
But it seems like it's a huge leap from slaughtering innocent babies was okay then with a sword or whatever, to protecting the life of a fetus that's no bigger than a.
Yes, I agree.
It's a long way.
Well, in a way it is. In a way it is. So that the Old Testament is like, even though Jews don't like to hear this, but it is. I mean, any Christian would have to say this. The Old Testament contains very much that is dark, very much that is provisional, very much that is allowed by God, just because He's dealing with this people and trying to develop them into something greater than they are. This barbaric, savage, cruel, but great, but nevertheless very great, nomadic people, trying to develop them, and He does. And then you have the stage set for Christianity and the fruition of all of this development.
Sounds good, but I can't accept that, because if you take the situation where Moses was warring against somebody, and his men didn't kill all the animals, came back with some, and then Moses has them make sure he kills the rest of them. And I mean, if God was trying to lead, God was accepting in their barbarianism to lead them out of it, then why did He kind of push them back into the barbarianism again?
Yeah, well,
I don't get it.
Yeah, but I mean, again, when the point that's made there, I mean, about the killing and slaughtering of the animals, the point there was why were they bringing things back? In other words, were they bringing things back for their own personal gain? That sort of thing. And I think the real point was that you don't make that kind of profit. And that's something that Jews, very much, the Jews need to be taught, I'd say. And Moses knew it. And so what you see in the Old Testament, I think, is a profound record of human failure, savagery and cruelty, and a cruel world. It's a very cruel world.
I have no objection to that.
Yeah, and all of this.
I object to God
right, well,
approving it.
But I mean, God working with people where they're at, in their cruelty and sin and all the rest of it, and moving. And there's a lot of failure along the way, but moving towards something much greater.
Editorial comment. Justifying the slaughter of infants and animals as God working with people where they are at is, I think, the epitome of dishonest whitewashing. Something is glaringly wrong with an ideology that accepts gratuitous slaughtering of human beings as part of God's plan, yet claims the life of a microscopic fetus must be sacrosanct no matter what. Here's my final session with Father Ron. Holocaust Revisionism and Michael Shermer. Previously, Father Ron had pointedly criticized Michael Shermer, the editor of Skeptic magazine, for being too chicken to tackle the issue of Holocaust Revisionism.
Could it be that they're afraid to? But my real belief is that the reason they don't do it is they're deadly afraid to touch it.
But unknown to Father Ron and myself at the time of our previous meeting, Shermer already did cover Holocaust revisionism extensively, devoting an entire issue to the topic. He also has a videotape lecture on it. I brought these items in to show to Father Ron.
What is this proving the Holocaust thing?
Oh, wow. What is this proving the Holocaust? Now, would you call him a coward?
Oh, yeah, Michael Shermer, the coward.
That was last year's.
Yeah. But I would like to read it.
Yeah.
Even though he is really a coward.
Now, why would he be a coward if he's got an whole issue on that? He's got a videotape here.
Oh, is that his videotape?
This is a videotape, a lecture on Holocaust revisionism.
Yeah. Well, the thing about, I really do want to read this, but the thing is about Shermer. Michael Shermer is phony.
Oh?
He knows that a lot of the things that he says are not true. Or there are great problems with the things that he says. He knows very well, but he is frightened. And I think that it's a sad statement, I would say. you know, it's a very sad statement about him. That you know, that he is engaged in this charade. But there it is. I don't want to cast any stones, but I would like to read it.
Yeah.
But I mean,
of course, I don't see this. If your contention was that the reason he doesn't cover the Holocaust Revisionism issue because he's afraid of it, and yet he has, and he's covered an entire issue plus the videotape.
The trouble is that I know. I mean, he did it, but the fact is there are things in there that he knows not to be true. There are things in this issue that he knows aren't true, and he has said that he doesn't want to. Well, he's admitted to people whom I know that he said, "Look, I'm not a hero," and he's fudging. It's not that there's nothing in what he says. I don't mean that, but he is deliberately not saying all that he knows. He is deliberately, really engaging, I would say, in deception. It's an amazing thing. You know, here's the editor of Skeptic magazine, engaged in a deliberate deception to save his own skin.
I have no idea what you're talking about. This entire issue is a lot of...
Suppose he came out and... Because he's much more skeptical about the Holocaust than he lets on.
Oh, so that's what you're saying.
Suppose he came out and said all that. That would be...
Because I thought that whole issue was very well balanced, and I thought he bent over backwards to be fair to everybody.
Well,
so I'm trying to understand how you're thinking here. Now, you're saying that he's actually much more skeptical that the Holocaust happened?
That the Holocaust didn't happen. I mean, he's skeptical that it happened, yeah. Yeah, much more. He knows more than he will ever let on. He's talked to... see, the thing is, there are a lot of things that are on tape with Shermer, and these tapes will... Well, I don't know if they can be released legally, but people want to release them, I know that, where, you know, he admits to certain things, and he has interviewed different people who will say one thing for publication and another thing in private. So, and you know, the thing that troubles me about this whole thing is not so much that. I mean, that goes on all the time. I can understand that. The thing that troubles me is that, you know, Shermer, you'd expect something more from him. That's all.
I was impressed. He does admit that it may not have been 6 million, and there may not have been all the gas chambers, and possibly not in completely intentional. But nonetheless, but he says that you shouldn't define the Holocaust in those terms. It was thousands of incidents, and the whole thing did happen, basically.
Well, what I'd like to do is take a look at this.
Yeah, you're welcome to.
I would very much like to...
I've marked out a few places there for myself.
Yeah, I would very, very much like to read this and see what he has to say. If I may, I hate to have this on tape, but I don't care. But, you know, I'll say it takes a certain question where all of a sudden you say, gee, there is this odd question about that stuff that happened during World War II. I mean, because I never questioned any of this, you know, until about 5 years ago. I just accepted it completely on faith. Just totally.
Well, I've seen enough videos, so I know some. I mean, it may not be 6 million. You know, there may be all kinds of details that are different, but the basic thing, I don't think there's any question at all.
Jewish culture was destroyed. People were displaced. But the mythology of World War II, mythology that's grown up, was that thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands, hundreds of thousands of people, millions of people, were killed in mass execution machines. And there were camps that were made just for that purpose.
But is there enough evidence for that in terms of the memos and things?
I would say, to me, I'd say there's no evidence for that.
Be sure you read that magazine.
So I will read that. I will read this magazine with great care. But I mean, it's hard for me to knowing about Shermer. It's hard, but I would say I don't think that happened. However, that isn't to say that Jews didn't suffer a horrible fate during the war, and that lots of people were killed. You know, so I mean, I don't want to make light of it.
David's wives and concubines.
We discussed last time about marriage and whether in the New Testament Jesus is contradicting the other Gospels in Matthew when he includes the phrase except for sexual immorality.
Right.
And you interpreted that to mean, as the Catholic version of the Bible says, unless the marriage was unlawful in the first place.
Right.
Okay. I looked at that pretty carefully, and I can't prove you wrong on that. Although all the Protestant Bibles don't put it that way, two of the Catholic versions do say, unless the marriage is unlawful, or I am not speaking of an illicit marriage.
Right.
So that makes some kind of sense, but I just don't think that's what he meant. Because if he had meant that, he would have said it in a different way that wouldn't be so ambiguous. But that ambiguity would be there from the very start, and any writer would know that and say.
It wasn't an ambiguity. I mean, if people knew what that meant, it wasn't an ambiguity.
However, then you still have a problem, though.
Yeah.
And that is, in the Old Testament, David had many wives.
Yeah. David is when David makes that decision, he's a tainted character.
Yeah. Well, so how can the Bible say that he's a man after God's heart?
Well, precisely because this is the great thing, that God, in a way, David is a type for a lot of us, because God loves us even though we do sin. And incidentally, the thing about many wives, there is a lot in the Old Testament that, and our Lord mentions this himself in the New Testament, where he says there's a lot that's provisional, there's a lot that was allowed because of the hardness of your hearts. Do you remember that?
Well, so why can't it be allowed today because of the hardness of our hearts?
And, well, yeah. What's
that the Bible says David, I'll read it.
Yeah.
David did that which was right in the eyes of the Lord, and turned not aside from anything that he commanded him all the days of his life, save only in the matter of Uriah the Hittite.
Right.
I have found David a man after my own heart, who will do all my will. All.
Right.
So David was there. To me, that refutes the Bible right there. That's an absolute contradiction, that a man who had many wives, who was a murderer, an adulterer, a voyeur, and etc., etc., is considered a man after God's heart.
Yeah, but again, to me this is not a problem. Look, and it's not as if the Bible is saying, well, this is nothing. Obviously, the way that's written there, that is considered to be something terrible that David did. I mean, the Bible is not saying this is absolutely nothing. The Bible, in fact, is recording this as an act of shame. An act that is a shame for David. And what that is saying is, notice the emphasis here is on the Lord's love and on David's response to God. But God's love remains, and God is loving you who has done this shameful, terrible thing, and God is constantly calling you back to himself.
Yeah, so you're doing the same thing.
That's what this is all about.
No, well, so you're doing the same thing again. You're talking about related issue. You're making a good point about that, but the issue is this a contradiction that disproves the Bible? I say yes. Whether what you just said doesn't relate to what I just said.
How am I missing? We got to get this. Let's get this contradiction out on the table. What's the contradiction?
The contradiction is that David never did anything wrong except one thing, but he did many things wrong.
Well, I see what you mean. But look, the point is when he says in the matter of Uriah, right? In the matter of Uriah, but that includes all of these things. And
so you're saying the
matter of Uriah is a matter of lustful voyeurism, is a matter of his coveting his neighbor's wife.
He had many wives.
Yeah.
And concubines.
Yep. Yeah, but the whole point is, about this matter of these things, as the Lord said, these things were allowed because of
the hardness of the heart. But David didn't have a hard heart. He had his heart was after God's heart.
But what he's talking about there is an inability. Remember, he said he was a man after my own heart, right? Yeah. A man whom God specially elected. He wasn't saying that David was not a member of a tribe who, at a certain time, lived in a certain way that was not the way God was ultimately going to show we should live, in which there were, numbers of wives and so on, in which the notion of one man, one woman, and that is it, nothing else, that this would hold. That's something.
So I don't get it. You just say one man, one wife, and yet here's a man with many wives, and he's God's favorite. So I don't get it. It doesn't make sense.
Yeah, but look, who was living? The whole situation there was a situation in which God wanted to bring Israel to a point where a revelation about the way in which it was most proper to live would be given. This was something that was ongoing. And God was just allowing these things. But the whole matter of taking the wife of another man, having him killed, and all the rest of it, that was something that David himself could recognize as wrong.
But he didn't recognize taking concubines and more wives from Jerusalem.
No.
That was not wrong. He didn't recognize that.
He didn't recognize as wrong.
He wasn't too smart, was he?
No, that he didn't recognize as wrong. Hey, but he was part of a very fierce culture that was itself growing in the knowledge of good and evil.
We have David, a man after God's heart.
Yeah.
Apparently had a hardness of heart. And Solomon, the wisest of all men, wasn't so wise with his thousands of wives, or hundreds of wives.
Or whatever. Right. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, look...
It doesn't compute for me.
Well, I mean, the reason I think it doesn't is you're thinking... how should I put it?
Logically?
No, I think what you're doing is you're thinking... Well, in a way, you're not thinking of this in a kind of human enough way, or historical enough way, realizing that that something is, that there's a process going on in which how men and women are to behave toward each other, toward the Lord, and all the rest of it, in an absolutely fierce climate, is being developed. And that you can't have everything at once. You cannot have everything at once. It has to come piecemeal.
Well, I don't agree. I think a prophet could show up to a group of cavemen and tell them, you should have one wife.
Well,
and the wiser of them will say, yes, ideally you're right.
Editorial comment. I hope you noticed how Father Ron talked all around the issue, but ignored the basic contradiction. That monogamy is God's intention. David was a man after God's heart, yet he had plenty of wives and concubines.
Shermer's response to Father Ron. Editorial comment. I thought I caught Father Ron red-handed in his specious accusation that Michael Shermer was afraid to tackle Holocaust revisionism when in fact Shermer had already done so extensively. His cryptic remarks about Shermer's alleged cowardice compelled me to give Dr. Shermer a call.
You can tape it. Go ahead.
Okay, great, thanks. Because I agree with the stuff you do. Okay, so anyway, I was talking to this priest, and the second time I talked to him, he started criticizing your magazine and like magazines as to why are they afraid to touch Nazi Holocaust revisionism. And it's always easy to target Uri Geller and fake psychics and so forth. And I thought that was a good point. And then, of course, I realized that I found out that you did a whole issue on it last year, and a tape. And so next time I talked to him, I brought that in, and he just sort of poo-pooed it. I thought I caught him red-handed in a false sort of accusation.
And so then he just didn't seem to acknowledge the fact that he shouldn't have said what he said.
He originally said, why don't those guys take on something important like Holocaust denial?
Exactly.
Oh,
Right.
and we did, and you said they did, and he said, oh.
And well, he sort of mentioned that you were a coward. and so later on, I tried to press him. Where does his attitude come from? And then it seems that he is in touch with some of the people at the Institute for Historical Review.
Oh, you mean I'm a coward after he read the article?
Apparently, yeah. Well, no, he didn't know. He didn't know about it at the first time.
Oh.
But now he after I gave it to him.
Yeah.
Then the next time I talked to him, apparently he talked to one of these guys or some friend of his in California, and he says that person said that you admitted to him you were a coward because what you had found out there was much less, or there was evidence that the Holocaust was far less extensive, but you didn't want to write that, so you wrote whatever you wrote instead, and just ignored the evidence to show that it was much.
He's been talking to David Cole. David Cole is my arch enemy in the, or at least he's taken it upon himself to be my arch enemy in the historical revisionist movement, Holocaust revisionist movement, that is. Anyway, Cole was just upset that I didn't agree with him, is all it was. Basically, these guys are calling for an open debate on the Holocaust. So I said, okay, you got it.
Yeah.
Give me your best shot. So I lined up all their claims, and I knocked them all down one by one. And so they're not really interested in an open debate. They're interested in converting people to their position.
Yeah.
And Cole was especially upset because, first of all, we'd been on the Donahue show together, and he thought he had groomed me into saying things he wanted me to say.
Yeah.
But, I'm my own man. I said what I felt I had to say, what was right. Yeah. And sure, it's true. There are some problems with the physical evidence and its corroboration with eyewitness testimony and so on that needs to be worked out. But the fact that there's some problems and inconsistencies and need for revisionism is nothing new in any historical field. That's what historians do. There's problems in the JFK assassination that need explaining. There's problems in World War II, Pearl Harbor, that need explaining. So there's nothing new in that. And the fact that I didn't make a big deal about those things, the reason I didn't was because that's one of their strategies, is to make a big deal about small things that really don't matter much.
Yeah,
and that's what they were mad about. And so
but did you ever say to him in a joking way that you were a coward?
Oh, God, no. Of course not.
Okay. I just would have loved to have heard that conversation between the priests and him.
I think Cole, see, what happened was after the article came out, Cole called me, and he was acting really strange and asking a lot of weird questions, like, isn't it true that you left this out on purpose? I'm like, well, no, David, it doesn't work that way. I have limited space. I felt that this was more important than that, and that I included A, B, and C, but not D, E, and F, because this was the article I was writing, not the article you're writing, and this went on for like an hour. Then I come to find out he was taping that conversation, which is illegal.
Yeah.
But I'm not a very litigious person. In fact, I've never even been in court, so I'm not going to do anything about it. But anyway, he was taping it in order to try to trap me into saying something. So then he gives a talk at the IHR conference last year on me. The title of his talk is, Michael Shermer is a schmuck, or whatever it was. Anyway, so I was at the conference the day before, but I couldn't make it the day he was speaking because I had some other family stuff I had to do. But he took that as cowardly also. Anyway, I sent somebody else down from my staff, and he said it was pretty appalling. I mean, he went on and on about see, I have this other, I used to be a professional bike racer, so anyway, I have this other bike company and a race that I put on and so forth. So he went on and on about how I'm using the skeptics to raise money to support my bike habit and all this just idiotic things. And I don't know, it was pretty pathetic. I have the tape of it. It's kind of embarrassing for him, I think, that he would waste an hour of precious lecture time in front of a large audience, in which he could be talking about his research or whatever on me, that has nothing to do with the Holocaust. So.
Well, that's interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I really enjoy your work. I thought you did an excellent job in covering it, that issue, and also on the tape.
I did just get back from Europe, and I went to all the camps. And here's another example of how idiotic some of their challenges are. I mean, Cole has this whole thing about the peepholes don't have metal grids over them at the two of the camps, Mauthausen and Majdanek. And this is proof that they weren't used for homicidal gassing because the victims would have just punched the glass out and let the gas escape. Well, first of all, the chamber is not under pressure, so even if you punch the glass out, it's not like the gas is going to go sucking out. And second of all, when you actually see the door, you know, I had no answer for that, and that's one of the things Coles was on me about. Like, how come you didn't include that fact that they didn't have metal grids over the peepholes, you know, in your article? It's like, what's the relevance? And anyway, when you actually see it, you go, oh, I see. You know, the glass, there's still glass in there. It's like half an inch thick. And on top of that, it's only like 1 inch in diameter. And so, and the whole peephole is surrounded by a metal shroud that's like an inch thick on either side of the door, which is itself an inch thick. So you have like this 3-inch thick hunk of metal with a half-inch thick of glass, hunk of glass in between. You couldn't break that thing with a ball-peen hammer, let alone, you know, you're in there naked, scared, tired. What are you going to do? You take your thumb and break the glass? Impossible. So those are the kinds of things that they come up with to try to stir things up. And so I had to go see it for myself. Now, you know, there were some disturbing things I encountered at these camps just by asking certain questions. Some people were getting mad at me, some of the directors and archivists and stuff like that. Like, why are you asking these kinds of questions? I said, well, because I'm trying to debunk these guys. You know, they're claiming this, and so I've come here to get answers. And they weren't too open to that. And, in fact, I've decided these camps are really more like religious monuments and cemeteries to be worshipped, and you go there to pay your respects, not to go there and do research on what happened and when and why and how and that kind of thing. And I found that kind of disturbing because since I'm not Jewish and I lost no one in the Holocaust or whatever, it's not an emotional experience for me. I just go there, I'm just curious about things. But it is for them, and so this is what gets the Holocaust revisionists all tweaked out. You know, they say, aha, they're covering something up. You know, they won't answer our questions. But it's not that they're covering anything up. They just don't care. They're not interested. Why would anybody ask? It's like going to a cemetery and asking, hey, how'd they make that tombstone? Who made that tombstone? You know, it's like, why would you ask that? You're in a cemetery. You know? So that kind of bothered me, but I would not make a big deal about that because what difference does it make? It doesn't change the historical story. It's just kind of an odd thing. But they do make a big deal about that. And then the fact that I don't make a big deal about that, then they get on me and say, aha, you see, Shermer's helping him to cover up this thing, or he's cowardly, or whatever. And it's like, no, it has nothing to do with the story. Anyway, that's something else.
Well, it just seems to me that you have shown a certain amount of courage in doing all this. I think it's excellent.
Yeah, well, see, but it's not a matter of courage or not courage. It's a matter of, do I agree with them or not? That's really what it comes down to. And since I don't, then they're mad. Okay.
Keep up the good work.
You're on our mailing list, right? You're a subscriber?
Yeah, I'm a subscriber, right.
Okay.
Okay, thanks a lot.
Bye.
Yep, bye-bye.
Concluding comments. I have the highest regard for Michael Shermer, and I thought Father Ron's casting of Shermer in such a negative light spoke volumes about Father Ron's poor judgment. I did agree with Father Ron on a few general points about theism, particularly on the idea that ultimate reality is spiritual rather than physical. In his book, Handbook of Christian Apologetics, which he co-authored with Peter Kraft, on page 107 he writes, no matter how many atoms you line up, or how complicated their lineup, you cannot get a wholly different thing. Thought, consciousness, reason, self-awareness, from mere bits of matter. Awareness of the material universe is not one more part of that universe. So on that point, as a theist, I agreed that there is something beyond science and materialism. But I certainly do not think that traditional Catholicism is a valid expression of that spirituality. I didn't find Father Ron's arguments reasonable at all. And like Peter Kraft, I see him as a professional rationalizer or whitewasher for the Church. And I find that very disturbing, because in upholding traditional Catholicism, they cause deep psychological harm to people who are Catholics and who might be gay, or who want to remarry, or who fear hell, etc., etc. I have an essay on my website on all the reasons why I am not a Catholic, beyond the particular issues Father Ron and I discussed here. I suspect devout Catholics won't like what I've said, and hardcore atheists won't either, since I remain a general theist, but I think a position between Christians on the one side and atheists on the other is the most reasonable one. Thank you for listening. And now I have to go feed my dogs.